Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest Forward 50 book club. This is part of an ongoing series of conversations that we've been having with amazing public sector authors. We've talked about technology infrastructure, we've talked with science fiction writers, and today we're going to talk with the authors of the new book, The Tech That Comes Next, by Afua Bruce and Amy Sample Ward. Et bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, allons faire notre conversation en anglais, vu que les auteurs sont anglais. Mais nous traduisons les enregistrements et la transcription sera disponible sur YouTube quand nous publions ceci plus tard. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the unceded indigenous lands of the Kanyen-Kihaka Nation. As we are meeting in a virtual environment, we also acknowledge from coast to coast to coast the ancestral and unceded territory of all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people that call this land home. The full title of the book we're going to discuss today is The Tech That Comes Next: How Changemakers, Philanthropists, and Technologists Can Build an Equitable World. It explores the implications of our use, creation, and funding of technology today, and how social impact organizations, technologists, funders, policymakers, and most importantly of all, communities can work together to change it all. Now, let's get straight to the conversation because I've got lots of questions, and I'm sure those of you online do as well. Please welcome Afua and Amy. Hello, you two.
Hello, I'm so glad to be joining you for yet another Forward 50 event, some of my favorite events.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, glad to be here.
You're a new face to the group. Obviously, Afua, you've been on our stage a few times. I'm going to get into the questions in a second, and we did have a quick recap of the book and talked a little about it in an earlier recording, but maybe for the folks that are tuning in now, you can give us a couple minutes on how you met and came to write the book.
Sure. So Amy and I first met several years ago now at the NTEN's annual conference, the NTC. Amy, as they will tell you, leads NTEN. And I was just so impressed with NTEN, which is an organization for nonprofit technologists, with the intentionality with which the NTC approached inclusivity and community-centered solutions, as well as balancing the promise and the hopes and the capabilities of technology with the realities of moving forward social impact organizations. And over the past few years, Amy and I have had the opportunity to collaborate on a couple of different projects. Most recently, this book. And so I was thrilled to be able to do that with Amy and to really bring a relative expertise in the lessons we've learned in our careers to these pages of this book that we can share with you all now.
Amazing. And Amy, maybe tell us a little about your background and your organization too.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy, and as Afua said, I'm the CEO at NTEN, which is a nonprofit organization focused on making sure that every mission, every movement, every social impact entity is able to really be successful because of the strategic and equitable use of technology. So unfortunately, to many people's frustration, we do not recommend technology products. We don't tell you which things to use or which things not to use. Instead, we are really trying to build up the capacity of every single person who's working in social change efforts to be able to make technology decisions, to budget for the technology that they need, and to use technology, put it to work towards their mission.
It feels like not a lot of tech, maybe outside the open source movement, is built by communities. That open source seems to be where a lot of community-driven technology creation happens. And obviously, Linux powers and Unix systems, open source, power most of the cloud computing that we rely on today, but it's sort of been captured by private sector organizations. How will changing the world so that communities are driven to build technology improve society as a whole? And maybe Amy, you can take that.
Yeah, I will buy time for Afua's wonderful answer, but my initial response is I think part of what we want to change is actually the context of that question. Like within the question, as you've asked it, is the assumption that a technologist is a very specific person and has a very limited role. So we're not trying to say that there will not be software developers or coders anymore, and that folks who are doing that now will no longer do it, and now it's someone else's job. What we're saying is that to be a technologist and to be an active part of contributing to the design, the implementation, the evaluation, and the evolution of technology is much broader than the person who coded it originally, right? And that there are already, open source is a great example, but I would say a lot of nonprofits are creating technology in community engaged ways. NTEN's rebuilding our website right now. We have 3 different community committees. We have all of our staff. We have all these different groups who are giving feedback, taking, surveys, helping like QA, telling us what's most important, what they're trying to do in our program so we can make sure that's the content that's on the website, right? That's building technology with community. So it isn't just changing like who has what job. It can be that, and it includes that, but that's not all of what we're trying to advocate for, but really to understand that there are a lot more ways to build trust and accountability into these processes by including the community from the start.
Afua, did you cite examples of this kind of shift in the book?
Yeah, I think we were able. I think one of the things actually that I was most excited for in this book was the chance to talk to so many people who are doing parts of this work already, who are already not just imagining, but starting to fund technology differently, to design technology differently, to deploy and to develop technology differently. And so, to Amy's point, even though there will always, I'm a computer engineer, I think there will always be a space for the solid technical talent, your technical expertise. We don't want to shortchange the social impact sector or social change movements from technology expertise, but we do want to broaden who is seen as being involved in that process. And so by centering communities and really working with people who are going to be using the technology, who will be affected by the technology, you can develop technology differently and so that it is more equitable and can be used in more intentional ways by communities. And so one of the examples that we talk about in the book is the example of DataKind working with John Jay College. And John Jay College had identified that they had a number of students who finished 3/4 of their credits they needed to graduate, but never graduated. And so they started to ask, why is that? If you finished most of the credits you need to graduate, you know how to take tests, you know how to budget time. So why is that? So they partnered with DataKind, which is a nonprofit that does data science and AI for other nonprofits around the world, to take a look at it and to develop some models. But through that process, the DataKind data scientists didn't just sort of go off in the bubble by themselves and develop these algorithms by themselves and then toss it over to John Jay College to use and to make decisions and to spit out, recommendations by themselves. Instead, it was a very collaborative process where the data scientists worked hand in hand with the staff at John Jay College to really understand the process, to get information, and to have the staff at John Jay College weigh in as to, yes, this seems right. No, this doesn't seem right. Here are the things we want to value. Here are the things that may not need to be emphasized as much in the process. And the algorithm spit out recommendations, which were then acted on by the humans, the staff themselves. And so that process of bringing people along, really working collaboratively, ultimately led to, over a 2-year period, 900 additional students graduating from John Jay College. And on top of that, the staff at John Jay College then describing that they were more empowered to have more informed technology discussions with any new vendors. So now as new technology vendors came to John Jay College and proposing a whole range of technology solutions, the staff was now more equipped to have the discussions and could really hold their funders, the vendors, to task to have these discussions and to engage appropriately, because they knew that they now could be a part of that design process. They could be a part of the deployment process as well.
I have often used the term the opposite of progress is Congress, maybe a little naively. But getting consensus, having many people contribute to something, move a thing forward, often creates delays rather than the sort of stereotypical iconoclastic hacker in their garage just barreling forward and apologize for all the things they break later on. The kind of image that we have. How does community created technology win out over individualism if that's the case? Or do you reject the premise? Do you think that communities can actually deliver stuff better and faster?
I don't know that better or faster are words that we use in this book because it's not about speed and who is it better for, right? What we really want is for technology to be in support of addressing the needs that communities have, not exacerbating them, right? So I think part of how I think about this, the opposite of progress is Congress question is really that in my experience, not with government, we'll put government aside for a second, but in communities and building technology in communities in the nonprofit sector has been that when there's that feeling that it is not clear and there's priorities that are kind of being fought over, it's because folks have not been engaged fully enough to understand what's on the table. So engaging communities fully means usually and often those folks can see, actually, our goal is this, our values are this. I can see that that's maybe a V2, right? I can see that that can be put down the line and that this other feature request or this other functionality is more important. And in the book, we actually have an example from an organization called Rescuing Leftover Cuisine that kind of supports 3 different communities. So restaurants who have leftover good, ready to use food, volunteers who can physically move that food to another place, and then the organizations who can put the food to use. And those are 3 very different groups, right? Like staff in a restaurant who are like, get this food out of here now, have a very specific view on the chain of events, right? And the volunteers who are like checking their phone and they're going to walk a bunch of food from a restaurant to, a shelter or a service organization, they have a very specific view of what they can do, right? And then the receiving organizations. But they actually created a space where all of those organizations can see the requests for functionality or new features that all of them are putting in. And that way, both they know that the features as staff that they're trying to move forward with have come from the community, are rooted in real life use cases, right? So they can understand really the implication of what they might be building. But also they are being prioritized by that community collectively. So folks are really able to say, oh yeah, I could see that restaurants really want this thing, but it is going to have far less of an impact on what we're doing overall than this request that the receiving organizations have made. So yeah, we support you prioritizing that over our request, right? But again, it's because they have access to the full picture and they are treated as valued partners in the work. And that changes the whole context, right? Then you're not like Congress, individuals all fighting over very disparate requests, you are in there in the same context.
And I think just building off of some of what Amy said, I've forgotten who said it, but if you move fast and break things, the things that break are often people, right? And so this idea that we have to move fast to be making progress, I'd really push back against that assumption, because who are we making progress for and who are we leaving out? And the reality is that when it comes to technology, that we often deal with what's often referred to as unintended consequences, which often means that historically overlooked populations have again been overlooked by the technology solutions, whether it's, back to automatic faucets not recognizing darker colored skin, whether it's forms only having 2 options for genders, or whatever it is, not building in the time to really center the communities where the technology is going to be used, and taking the time to really hear from those communities, to involve them in the process of designing and developing that technology so that it can be used in inclusive and equitable ways.
I really like that idea that I think something I realized in talking to the two of you is that we often talk about technical debt when someone builds a product and they take shortcuts and later on they need to come back and patch that technical debt and make the fixes they wish they'd done in the first place, but they had to get to market or something. We don't often talk about the debt that you incur when the people working on a project are misaligned. In a for-profit organization, that might mean more frequent meetings or more bugs, or you're not testing the right things, or people are calling in sick, or there's turnover. Those are all forms of cost that we don't normally account for. We're just counting lines of code and when do we ship. But I think this idea of like the debt you incur if you don't have a shared vision gets surfaced much more early on in a community where everybody's given a voice, because you got to solve the problem and make sure everyone understands what's going on. I just think of like how much progress the Linux Foundation made because Linus Torvalds did such a good job of articulating a shared vision and then distributing that across people, and it built one of the wonders of the technological world.
Well,
So
technology, I mean, I think there's already a clear understanding and agreement that adoption is the currency of technology, right? However, the kind of operating approach to that is that you could buy adoption with massive marketing after you've built the tool the way you want it to be, right? And instead of a massive marketing campaign just to get users that maybe don't like the tool after they get on it, what if you built in adoption from the start because you engaged the community and the tool actually worked for them and then they wanted to use it, right? Like we're still talking about adoption. We're just changing how it works and what the hook is, right? It wasn't a massive marketing campaign. It's that they actually like the tool and were engaged the whole time.
and even better, are likely to try and upgrade it and work alongside you rather than just being a customer. That's a really good way of looking at it. And
Absolutely.
I'd
And
like,
just,
sorry, go ahead.
on that technology, right, is not, we don't, I think one of the things that Amy and I talk about a lot in the book is that we don't necessarily need to be creating technology just for the sake of creating technology, that it should be in service of missions of organizations and of things that we want to be done. And, with that, technology is a really important piece of that, but so is the whole change management process. And so part of the change management process, when you study that, and when we talk in the book about how to actually execute some of this, how to do the technology that comes next and sort of shift, is to create that shared vision as one of the first steps to give people something to hold on to around what is this mission that we're actually trying to execute. Now we can really then step back and see what specific technology can be used. How does it need to be designed to help us move forward with these missions, to move forward on some of these social change issues that we're pushing forward, and to really have a positive social impact.
So you mentioned earlier that it's not about new people becoming the developers. It's about more people becoming technologists, I guess, but feeling like they're part of the technological process. And many public sector leaders aren't technologists. One of the things we cover at Forward 50 every year is not how to preach to the choir, but how do we convince those people who are tech adjacent, who have to lead a technical team but maybe aren't technical themselves, to understand how tech is different and how they think about building technology or supporting teams. Afua, what behaviors do you think need to change among leaders in the public sector to build better technology going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would actually say for the first part is sort of for the first part of your question, who we consider technologists, I would say that we do want different people, or more people rather, to be considered technologists. When you look at some of the diversity stats about women involved, people in color involved in technology, who are the coders, who are the engineers, their stats aren't great. Maybe slowly improving over the past couple of decades, but really not a lot of movement over the past few decades. And so I would start by saying, let's try to improve who we allow to be a technologist and who we encourage to become a technologist. And then with that, I think the second part is really encouraging people to recognize that just because you don't have a computer science degree, or you're not in there writing lines of code, or you don't wake up at 3 a.m. and like make a note on notebooks to yourself about, the new code you're going to write. Maybe that's just me who does that. But if that's not you, doesn't mean that you don't deserve a seat at a design table. It doesn't mean that you should, for some reason, be excluded from conversations about technology that you will then have to use, whether it's checking people in at your organization, whether it's to go back to the rescuing leftover cuisine example, helping to identify where food is available or where you're taking food to. Just because you aren't the one designing that technology and actually coding that technology doesn't mean that your voice shouldn't be valued and shouldn't be included in that design process. And so, we think about what comes next as part of the broader education for people. In the book, we talk about a number of different constituencies, including social impact organization leaders, policymakers, community members, and funders. Getting people comfortable with asking the right questions and giving some language to what questions can I ask of technologists? How do I voice what I actually need to do with the technology? How do I voice and make clear what the mission of the organization is, what the mission of the work is to technologists, to really be brought along in that process and to be engaged in the technical design and development?
Yeah, at NTEN, we've done, of course, that it is our mission, but for many, many years, we've done research into what, technology does in an organization. And we've found really consistently that it is a leadership issue, that technology needs to be a core part of how any organizational leader, understands their job. Some of the research that we've done has not necessarily tried to find this, but has surfaced these patterns where we see, regardless of the size of an organization's budget or the size of its staff or the mission area, there are some kind of core practices that consistently show an organization is going to be more effective with technology. And I consider them all leadership issues. One is that there is someone who's directly responsible for making technology decisions considered part of the leadership team, so that there are not conversations that are strategic happening in an organization without someone, like to Afua's point, at that table saying, hey, actually our database doesn't do that. Or, oh, that we would need to build that, or whatever the, comment might be, that they are already there, that it's not, oh, let's go check with the tech team, right? That technology is represented in those conversations from the start. The next is that you can actually articulate technology in your strategic plan. If as an organization, you put in this work to say, this is where we're going, and you can't name that technology is part of you getting you there, there's a lot of ripple effects, right? You can't then convince your team that technology is how you're getting there. You can't convince your funders that technology is part of getting you there, right? But it also has really day-to-day implications. How do you know what data to collect? If you can't, kind of go back up that ladder to say, oh, at the highest level, this is what we're trying to do. This is where we're trying to go. This is how technology is supporting us. And again, that has really everyday kinds of consequences. So I think there's a lot that organizational leaders, and I don't just mean someone who has the privilege to write ED or CEO in their email signature, right? Like there are a lot of leaders in an organization. Every leader, every staff person is making technology decisions every day. Like we are beginning year 3 in this panorama, and there's been a whole lot of technology decisions, right? Staff have been pivoting every day to figure out how they can continue to operate. So, but what we have heard, at least at NTEN, is that so many of those staff pre-pandemic had never had adequate technology training. So then all of a sudden they are being tasked, they see kind of community need going up quickly. They feel the pressure to provide those services. And they're like, well, the top result on my search was this tool. That's what we're going with. Like I got to just move. And as humans, we don't do great in that situation. We're not good under pressure, usually, especially with technology. We need better planning. But again, we need to think of technology really as a strategic piece of the organization so that we don't let decisions like that happen where, oh, that's just the one we found, right? If it's considered a strategic decision, we will put more kind of process around it and engage it more intentionally.
I like the idea that, a leader's not a manager. It's not the same thing, right? And that leadership, the idea of leadership is helping people through a thing and sort of showing them the way. And in some of the conversations I've had with technologists, just the idea that technology lets you scale something like basic ideas like elasticity, something can get bigger or smaller. If you can do it once, you can do it 1,000 times once it's written. Or the undo button, the idea that you could try something, if it doesn't work, you can roll back. I mean, these are foreign in the physical world, and it's internalizing those little lessons that then show people what's possible. So, Amy, do you have examples of, as you said, in the last 3 years of constant pivoting, uh, communities that have embraced technology that they, like before the pandemic, would never have considered doing stuff technologically, and now have gone, wait a minute, this is actually way better? Do you see
You know,
examples like that?
yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily something that we've covered in the book in a thorough way, but just something that feels top of mind to share as a counter to some of these more established organizations and all the privileges and opportunity that comes with making technology decisions as an organization. But I'm thinking of a lot of mutual aid efforts through the pandemic where, the idea of mutual aid, of course, is like hyper local human to human support within a neighborhood, for example. And there, I think, was never the feeling that you needed a lot of technology to support that until we were all literally in our homes, if we had the privilege to have a home, right? And so the way I've seen so many different mutual aid efforts, even like, free pantries, built using tools that are accessible to every single person, that you don't need an org domain, right, to qualify for. So folks doing incredible things with Google Maps. Okay, here's the different, anybody could put a pantry on the map. Here's how to, mark it with this symbol if it's a pantry, mark it with this if it's a fridge, mark it with this if it has a coat closet, those things really, really inspire me because they were not created by someone who said, okay, now we need a map. So I know there's this like open source mapping tool. I could use that. I'm going to build the website to house it in, right? It was not tech first. It was problem first. And the Google map was just there, right? And I think that's a really awesome way to remember that it isn't hard to stay focused on the problem and let technology be matched to the need instead of thinking, oh, like what cool new thing could we build? Like, what if we don't build new things? what if, and I'm not actually advocating for this, but like, what if all the technology we needed existed, but it was not currently manifested in the configurations that we needed it, right? And our whole world going forward was just recalibrating everything we have. I don't know that would be bad, right? Because what we would need is the impact to be right, not magical new technology constantly. And I think a big part of what we want to get across in the book is that technology is amazing. We don't need to celebrate it. What we need to celebrate is getting to a better world, and technology can get us there. But again, maybe not the technology we have right now.
So we have a question from Mike Nelson. He's one of our advisors, actually. Mike is working at the Carnegie Endowment for World Peace and was formerly Al Gore's chief science officer, CIO. I don't remember exactly what. Has been thinking
I thought
about
Al
this.
Gore created the internet.
I was just going to say, well, thank you for the internet. And
That's right. Just the algorithms.
Possible.
Only the algorithms. That I've been waiting to use that joke for so long. So I guess Mike's question, if I want to boil it down, he was asking if you think about a startup, and we can apply this to anybody building emerging technologies or pioneering a new business model, what is the ideal makeup in terms of coders and developers, MBAs and accountants, communication types, sales and marketing, lawyers, jazz pianists, or other? Like, what do you think the new ideal dream tech team, and I know it's not tech, but it's the team that wants to build good, productive, consensual outcomes for groups, what should that team look like, and how would you think about changing the makeup of a team based on what you've learned from writing the book?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just recognize that sometimes, living in community, centering communities is hard. Right now, for example, my community of my neighbor has decided now is a great time to do some type of home improvement project with machinery. So my apologies if there's noise in the background, but that is life. Mike, to your question here, I think it's really hard for us to give a specific formula for exactly what percentage of engineers should you have or what percentages of MBAs and accountants you have. I think for me, when I talk to organizations, it's more about what perspectives need to be represented at the table and who can speak to those perspectives, and then what processes do you have in place to make sure that you are working with the community. And so, yes, you'll certainly want to make sure that you have people to write the code, to develop the technology that's there. But you'll also want to make sure that you've got perspectives of the people who are using the technology. And if you're designing for use within organizations, that you talk to people at multiple levels of the organizations, for example, and a couple of different roles. And then you have a process by which you are listening to and have people not just have the ability to speak to, but are actually heard and actually have some type of feedback mechanism or a mechanism for accountability for the community that will be using those solutions and more. And then, of course, thinking about how you're communicating out what you're doing and managing those communications is important. And, the former FBI employee and myself will say, you should probably have some legal representation there as well as you're doing these things, both for things, regulatory compliance where that's applicable in your field, and just general legal compliance is always a good thing. Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to name that one of the case studies we have in the book is an organization that I encourage folks to check out, A22. And Lynn, one of the co-founders, had a really great kind of personal experience that I will relate, but, encourage you to read the book and read Lynn's own words about this. But, his experience, he was born and grew up in Myanmar, moved to the US as for school, college, that transition. And part of A22's work, one of their first projects was a project back in Myanmar. And, he said, even as someone who was born and raised in the specific, area that we are doing this project, I am not living there today. I'm not living in the house where we are installing this electricity. The assumptions I'm making and the decisions I'm making are already too separate for me to make them without the community. And so when I see that question of, how many coders, how many MBAs, I don't know, because how many of the folks in any of those roles are actively in the community that this technology is going to impact? If it's all of them, then great, any number. If it's none of them, then there's like a whole nother 7 job types that need to be filled by folks from that community, right? And so I think it's less about like, what's the pie chart or the triangle or whatever shape you're using, and more, what's the Venn diagram of the people we have and the people in this community, and how many of them are actively in that community today versus, historically or, genetically connected to that community. That is not the same, right? I see this even show up in the nonprofit sector where folks say, could we actually put like our beneficiaries and our program participants on our board? And my answer is always like, how do you have a board without those folks being there, right? Like, how are you making visionary decisions if the folks that are in your community aren't at that table every time? And I think often in tech conversations, we kind of think like, oh, that social impact sector, like they do things differently in tech, like we know what we're doing. No, nobody knows what they're doing. That's how we got here, So plenty of opportunity to change and ensure that the community is at the center of all that.
You're making me think of a blog post that I just finished working on with Pia Andrews. And one of the things that that we talked about, it was an amazing conversation. I don't think it's been published yet, but it'll be published fairly soon. And she said something about we need to stop the model of government gets permission from citizens, denizens to act unilaterally. and instead builds the thing with the citizens. Like there's this model of, okay, I got approval to build the thing. Now I'm going to go build it, but you've entrusted me with building it,
Yeah,
as opposed to let's go build a thing together. It sounds like that's what you're referring to.
my background, while it includes technology and social impact, has always been kind of at the place of mobilization and community organizing. I have knocked on a lot of doors in my time. I have supported a lot of folks who want to make the world better in a lot of different ways. And I have always, always said from that experience, representation is not participation. You don't get to say you represent me and then never engage me again, whether that's government or nonprofit organizations who say they represent the community that they serve, right? If we change from like, this is how or who we represent to who has participated in this process, and that gives us, the authority to move the process forward, it really, really changes what's valued and who's valued. And I think naturally kind of lends itself to the conversation that's in the policymakers chapter of the book about technology can support that process, but then also that process can support policies around technology. Again, reframing on valuing the people are involved and not that someone was elected or an organization, it is in place. Fua, I know you have lots of examples too.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we just echo everything that Amy said. I think what's encouraging is we're starting to see pockets of this throughout government agencies in the U.S. U.S. specifically is what I'm aware of, although I'm sure other government agencies are doing this as well. But the U.S. Census Bureau, for example, has a program called the Opportunity Project, where they take open source data or data that is government data that they have now made available and open, and they partner with nonprofit organizations and private sector companies to come together and to develop tools that use that data. So to do things like to take a map and overlay job descriptions and job openings rather with a map. And so people can see how long it would take them to get to the job with various modes of transportation. So if you have a car, how long it's going to take, if you're by bus, by bike, by foot. And so that can help people figure out what jobs might be best for them when transportation is an issue. And so doing a number of projects like that, I think, is one way to continue to engage communities with government in building and developing different solutions. And so I think some of those that we're seeing are really exciting. There's also the US, the public comment periods, which I think some agencies are starting to experiment with, and not just having public comment periods at the start before work gets done, but also what a review process might look like.
I love a 1 week comment period.
The 1 week comment period with a very specific form before anything is done, and that is it. And so looking at different ways to update that comment period in the public comment process, I think, are encouraging, and will become even more encouraging as people continue to play around and see what can be done there.
Yeah, time boxes are your friend, particularly now that we have this. I mean, obviously, access to tech is still a huge problem, but we can respond much more quickly than it used to. The old letters to the editor model, not so representational. Now it's kind of easy to not just have someone submit a question, but have many other people upvote it and say, yeah, me too, which I think is transformative. The ability not just to put your comments in, but then to amplify those comments. I'm going to segue almost as smoothly as your communities building things, Afua. We have a question from Peter Bruce, who other people have upvoted. So I'm going to ask that question now. You're both reframing some of our assumptions around speed, quality, cost, and inclusive design. How would you suggest we think about these trade-offs in the technology that comes next?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I think that, part of the underlying thesis of our book is that we will have to think about this differently. And in the chapter on funders and the chapter on community, we talk a little bit about starting to think of new business models and new funding models. And so thinking about, for a foundation, for example, or for venture capitalists, what might be an acceptable return period, an acceptable rate of return. And so if you can quantify or define more what impact is that worth a trade-off in the return time period, for example? There are a couple of different business models. We've seen B Corps used. There's some other models that other folks are starting to experiment with and study as well that would allow for, this idea of a double bottom line or a triple bottom line that really lets organizations value some of this impact and inclusivity along the way. And so I think those are some of the things that can be done and can be explored. I also, think conversations around, especially I think for the venture capital space, in just expanding the governance, the due diligence process rather, and the governance process. So how do you build into due diligence that sort of checklists that are used and more, looking for ways that new organizations and new startups are actively talking with their communities and have processes to hear from and to react to their communities. What does it look like to incorporate that into due diligence process and into governance frameworks for organizations, whether they're nonprofits or for-profits, what that representation looks like on the board as well.
I want to build on what Afua said about all of that. I agree with all of it. And, this idea of speed and cost and everything else, it really makes me want to name that I at least have come across no technology yet created by humans that was just like done and great and needed no other work on V1, right? Like V1, we normally approach V1 as, of course, like it'll be awful. We just have to create something so we can improve it, right? So instead, what are we doing to incentivize funding V4, V8, right? Like where we're actually a lot closer to success, instead of feeling like what we are trying to fund is the novelty of being the first new thing. Back to the point before, that was hyperbole, but like maybe now I'm convincing myself that all the tech we need exists and we should just be recalibrating all of it, right? Patching it all together. What does it look like to reconsider what cost is when you already are approaching technology projects knowing you're going to have the first few versions that are not ready? So what were you thinking of cost before, and how can you instead say, yeah, we're really committed by somebody's already done it 3 times and they really, really know what is needed next? That's where I want to be investing, right? That's the project that's already closer to success.
You're making me think of Marianne Belotti's Kill It With Fire. We had a great conversation with her on one of our book clubs. And, just like in your book, the tech that comes next may not be new tech. It may be tech redeployed or tech created by new people or whatever. Marianne's book, Kill It With Fire, doesn't actually advocate for killing all your computer systems with fire, much as we'd like to. It's much more like, hey, tech is a dumpster fire. We should try to figure out how to fix it. But her rules are often like, don't build a new thing. Figure out how to get that old thing working. That mainframe is going to be there for a while. And the person that built it probably was smart at the time. And there's some things you want to save. So I guess this leads me to the next question. And we talked a little bit about it in your responses just now. Metrics often drive what we tackle and how we act. The decision to build something new versus refurbish what was old. The definition of progress, or as you said at the beginning, Amy, better. What does better mean, right? What does a triple bottom line sort of ESG set of metrics look like for technology? How would you redefine the scorecard if you wanted to change the way the game was played?
Yeah, and even before talking about specific metrics, I think just touching on something that you said in the lead up to your question, Alistair, is really important in that, people who built something before probably didn't do it and create something because they thought it was bad and they thought it was horrible. And so I think, another really key point that we make in the book is that it's really important to honor expertise and to learn from others' expertise. That building this, what comes next, is really going to take a lot of different perspectives and coming together. And so there are I think there's a lot of temptation often to have, a big technologist with a big name just sort of swoop in and do all of the things and magically fix it. But it's really important to honor that expertise of the communities, of people who previously tried technology solutions, of your social impact organization leaders, of your policymakers, of your funders even, and to honor that expertise and to really build that into what you are designing and what you're creating.
What metrics would you like to see?
I think one of the most important metrics to me and that we talk about in the book is actually being able to consider success when you can hand things over for community control. If you can do that, it means you've deeply invested not only in engaging the community in building something that's really great and does the thing that the community needs it to do, but also that you've deeply invested in training and ownership and leadership so that the technologists are in the community, right? That it isn't like that separate set of staff positions from the community. And that that again, another metric or stage that I would want funders to be looking at is, oh, is this already so successful that it is ready to start thinking about transition to community ownership? Let's fund that. Let's fund the turnover, and what that can mean. So for me, when I think about metrics or triple bottom line, like I don't have a lot to say about triple bottom line or any number, quadruple. I don't know how many bottom lines there are, because for me, at the end of the day, like I look out the window and I look at our world and like I have a very long list of things that I think need to be better, So I don't care how many bottom lines you have. Show me the better world. And then we're really talking, and I welcome those conversations instead of the smaller, well, this technology can do this one bit of thing, because those conversations have to happen, but they will happen. And I feel like we often don't have how do we change all of this conversation,
Yeah, it does seem much less holistic than it should be. And to your point, there's this thing in analytics where once you define the goals, people start to optimize for the goals. Columbia University is currently going through this huge scandal where they rose to the rankings by gaming all of the metrics, right? Which is exactly what they were told to do by
and
the
I
metrics.
think it's something you learn in college.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. We only have about 10 minutes. There's three more things I really want to get to here. The first question, tech is great, but as we're seeing and as we have seen in recent, tech is great is a broad sweeping statement, but technology can be great. But as we're seeing in a lot of what the world right now, it can also be a huge attack surface and for vulnerability, for data theft, for security and stuff like that. Um, it seems to me like, especially as we move into a world where we're using data models, software used to be about, like, I was writing a game of Tetris, and if someone broke my Tetris, I couldn't play Tetris. Now software is full of people and their lives and their private data, and we feed that data to an algorithm, and it gives us code in the form of data models that can be, you know broken in dozens of ways, recidivism and cognitive bias and marginalization and so on. um, it seems like tech is really ripe for abuse, and we are less aware of the abuses because they don't happen in front of our face. Can you give us some examples of security and privacy issues that need to change as we build this new community technology to protect the vulnerable?
How long do we have when it comes to security and privacy issues? To your point, Alistair, software now includes a lot of people, especially when we're talking about in the social impact space. We are asking people often to give up a lot of their most sensitive information. If you are going to someone for some crisis counseling, you're talking about information that is really personal to you. If you are a refugee and you're looking for housing, you're asking people to take your data into your stories and information about you into their hands. And so it's incredibly important that as we work in the social impact space, we have to make sure that privacy and security are embedded into the design and execution of any type of technology that we do. It is what we would do. It's what we do physically when we're working on social change issues. It needs to be what we do digitally as well. There's sometimes I think a temptation, especially if we're using some current or older framing of technology and wanting it to be done fast, that we'll get it done fast and then we'll sort of add in security after that, then we'll figure out privacy after that. And it is very hard to design for privacy after you've already given all of the information away and after you've already sold some of the data or shared the data broadly. And so really, thinking about, again, what's that core mission? What are we trying to advance? We are there often with social issues to protect people and to advocate for people, to advocate for justice, to advocate for equity. And that means taking care of the data that people have been entrusted. And so that means, whether it's in a physical environment, you wouldn't just sort of throw people out to the wolves just because. In a digital environment as well, you need to protect that data to really have strong data standards and strong security standards and strong privacy standards as well.
And I think there's a lot of privilege that comes with data conversations, that the data that is most vulnerable is, only that governed by HIPAA compliance or something, right? For a lot of social impact organizations who are providing super critical services to truly the most vulnerable people, I'm talking about organizations who are providing, gender affirming care in Texas right now. Even having an email address in their system is making you vulnerable, right? Folks who are providing immigration law pro bono services, just having a name in your country of origin has made you vulnerable, right? So to think as a technologist, right, or as the folks thinking about the technology solutions those organizations are using, that the data that really needs to be protected, is contained in the database over here, is already setting us up to exacerbate the vulnerabilities that their community is experiencing, right? Literally any piece of information is now the problem, or could be for them. And so how do you build trust? Every single piece of communication has to include security, privacy as a starting point, so that those community members can even benefit from the services, right? Like they're there to help them, but they can't hurt them in that process.
Yeah, I think this was another of Pia's points in the blog post, which is going to come out soon, was if government is to reclaim trust in public institutions, it can't just be trustworthy. It has to make you feel trust, like by using it, your life is more secure, more private, more trusted. Like it actually has to, in the same way that social media wants to engage you so you don't leave the site, everything has to make you feel I trust government more by using this service. If
Right.
government is
Trust
to
has to
reclaim
be
it.
a practice, not a
Right.
status,
Yeah, that's a really interesting, people should finish using this app feeling more trusted, or more entrusted and more sort of heard than they did before they used it. A couple more quick questions. If you could talk to some of the world's big tech companies and change something about how they run their product meetings, what would you do? And if I'll start with you on this one, just quick checklist. If you're running a tech meeting, what would you change?
I think the first thing that I would change or encourage people to do is just to ask what perspectives are here, what perspectives are not here, before then going into where are we with the different features, where are we with time, where are we with cost, but really starting with what perspectives are here, what perspectives do we need to get here before going into the rest of the execution.
Amy, what would you change?
Yeah, totally the same. I mean, I would also challenge and have had opportunities to talk to those tech companies and say those product meetings shouldn't happen in your office. Those product meetings should happen live with the community, because just like government, you are accountable in a very different way when there is a whole room full of people hearing what you are saying, right? And I think that accountability and that kind of physical presence, whether it's virtual or whatever, is really, really important.
I love the idea of a tech startup live streaming like one stand-up scrum a week. Like,
Oh,
yeah, we're just
totally.
gonna live stream this thing. I mean, I remember watching the leadership debates in Canada, and my watch buzzed and said, "Watch the leaders debate." I pressed the button. Now on my phone, I have the leaders talking, and I'm like, why don't we expect our leaders to do this every month? Like, just the leaders of the parties have a debate everyone can watch, we can throw comments in, and then if they want some feedback, at the very least, they can look at sentiment analysis. Like, it seems like that's not hard. We have the technology to make that happen. And obviously we have to make sure that you can consume that information in lots of ways, but we're so close to that, and yet we only consider having them debate once every 4 years. Seems insane to me. Um, Last question, and it does get to this a little bit. Technology is such an asymmetric force that one person with some code can take over Twitter more than 1,000 well-intentioned people, right? It seems like it's almost mandatory for any organization to have technology and automation in order to survive at scale. And yet we have horrible incentives to join the public service and work in technology. They have a huge recruitment problem. How does the public sector and social impact organizations in general, communities and so on, not only attract technologists, but as you pointed out, convince non-technologists that they can take on a technology role and be successful in that role?
Yeah, I think that's the answer. Like, you already have staff in your nonprofit who likely already have technology as a big part of their job that you're just not acknowledging. You're not giving them that title. You're not giving them adequate training to be the technology leader that they are already being by de facto having no one else to do it, right? So there's this old, saying that, like, if you train your staff well, they'll leave, and why would you want to, invest all this time in your staff leaving? But if you train your staff really well, now everybody's better. Like, I just don't buy that there's a negative. Then another organization hired your well-trained person. Like, if we all trained everybody all the time, that wouldn't be an issue. But if you are, what we've seen at NTEN, organizations who really do invest in training do not have high turnover because folks feel valued, folks feel invested in, right? And there is a path. Even if you're a small organization, you have 6 total staff, you're not going to have, 18 rungs on a ladder of titles to go have, but you're always learning, you're always being invested in. Folks want to stay there, right? And that we have in the NTEN community literally countless people who started out, they had no CS degree, no technical background, got hired in a nonprofit, loved it, discovered that they liked websites, discovered they could actually build a website, right? Like, they just kept going. And that's what we want to see. That already exists, And so I think instead of feeling like, what can we do to be competitive so we hire someone from somewhere else, say, who's already interested? Even if you have no background, are you a community member? Have you gone through one of our programs? Are you a staff person? Let's train you up. You are the person that we need.
Yeah, I'd echo everything Amy said. We have a lot of talent already in the public sector and in the nonprofit space, and so we can definitely train people up. I also think, though, that from the formal education for computer scientists, computer engineers, and technologists who are trained formally, I think that we should start telling people while they're being educated that these are valuable career options. I think a lot of the way training has historically been done. And again, myself coming from a top 10 engineering school and having many of my best friends are engineers too. I can tell you that historically the training has been, the goal is to go into the private sector in a large company. And I think that we can really start by having case examples in classrooms that show the value and the challenges within the public sector, that it's not some backward space, but there is real work to be done. There are real challenges, and to really embed it into some of the formal training that doing technology work in the public sector and the public sector and in the nonprofit sector is valuable and is challenging and is just as worthy as doing the work in the private sector. And I think we can do a better job of making that argument in really orienting people that way through schooling.
Yeah, I love Mike's comment that he just threw in the chat. Why are we wasting all this money training people who leave? What if we don't train them and they stay? The counterfactual is a very useful way to think about this problem. Amy, Afua, I know you've been in huge demand with this book. Congratulations on the launch. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. If we can, let's pop up. Yeah, if you want to go check out the book, it's thetechthatcomesnext.com. And it's a really good way of rethinking our relationship with technology, because I think for too long we've kind of accepted it as this other thing that we are either beholden to or using, that's the domain of some elite class. And tech is everywhere today. The simple fact that we're having this conversation, the pandemic just accelerated that process, and I think it's time to help the world realize that tech is an enabler, but it's not the domain of some sort of esoteric group. So thank you so much, both of you, for writing this book and spending some time with us today.
Thanks, Alistair.
Thanks so much for having us.